We'll move to, got it. I think we'll
do that more elegantly than I did.
I think we'll move to our substantive discussion. So, and I don't know if everybody was on the line yet when Matt said that Ben, who's been previously redlining for us and sharing screen, is out today. So Matt is going to be doing double duty with managing a bunch of things as well as the red line. So thank you in advance for that, Matt. So I wanted to start with number 14, because the Committee on Style has done a couple of small things. There's a couple of requests from some comments to insert some definitions, which we'll be able to do once we tackle the preamble. But 14, there's a substantive request to make sure that we are covering what the committee intended. And then we have a couple of suggestions from Steph Tatum. So I wanna start with 14 and then we'll go through the couple of additional additions they're on, and then we'll get to the new stuff. And then we'll circle back to the preamble. So that's the overview of where we're going today. Okay, so the substantive request from the Committee on Style is what has been highlighted here in lines 139 and 140. Agencies should increase the availability of assistance for individuals interacting with their programs, and then beyond continuing to enable individuals to rely on assistance from other persons such as family or friends. So let's just take a beat, and does anybody want to weigh in on this? It's really just confirming that beyond continuing. We had a discussion about exactly what we meant here, and the Committee on Style wants to make sure that we've captured the substance of what people had wanted. So I'm going to pause, take a beat, and look for a hand. Okay, if there are no hands, then I'm going to assume this represents what the committee had wanted the Committee on Style to do. Okay, so we have a couple of requests for, so 15, why is in line 140, we'll define low bono. I don't think we're going to work on the definitions right now, but there's 3 definitions we've been asked to add. In line 148, Matt, why is 15 crossed out? Is this part of 14 still? I don't think it is.
That's some sort of technical glitch that happened when I deleted some of the subheadings per staff's suggested edits. So it's just it's a glitch in the system, and when we accept
but it is actually number 15 in line 148.
It should be
okay.
Number 15, yes.
Okay, great. So then I wanted to go back here because there was also language that the committee had left off, figuring out exactly how we wanted to recommend agencies and identify unnecessary administrative burdens required by statute, and then get that information and for what to OMB. So let's just pause here for a minute. I think this is proposed language from Steph. Is that right?
That's
Steph?
correct.
Okay, yes. You're on the call? Okay, great. Do you want to just take one sentence to explain what you did here and why?
Yes, we just felt that the annual performance reports and then a GPRMA-like process wasn't necessarily going to get the attention that the PRA supporting statements and legislative proposals would. Like, a legislative proposal is something fairly concrete, and the supporting statement identification would get it to the OIRA desk officer, who could then, work with their budget counterparts on the legislative submission. So we thought that those were the 2 best vehicles for providing that information to the Office of Management and Budget. And we also feel that we can offer agencies implementing guidance consistent with the later recommendation to help them understand how to do this.
Great. Okay, so with that, does anybody have any comments about modifying what really should be number 15 starting on line 148? Or is the committee okay with this language as it stands? Bridget.
I just want to say I think this looks great, and I think my favorite part is that it builds on existing processes rather than standing up something new, which I think gives it a chance at actually making a difference. So thumbs up. Good job, everybody.
Okay, thanks for that, Bridget. Anybody else? Okay, so let's go down. So last time we had changed the title of this next section from agency organization to agency responsibilities. Matt Weiner, who actually can't be here today, wondered whether a more specific or descriptive heading would be valuable. So I think maybe I will, well, does anybody want to weigh in on that now? And if not, maybe let's just like finish up what we have in this section and then circle back to see if once we've kind of gone back over the recommendations, anybody wants to comment on the proposed title. But does anybody have any comment on the title that they want to offer now before we do that? Okay, so Bill, go ahead.
Well, it just, we 16 is responsibilities and 17 is organization. So it was sort of a mix of responsibilities and organization. And that's why I think maybe the idea of having a different title might make sense, although I don't have one off the top of my head.
Yeah, okay. And you don't want to propose agency responsibilities and organization. All right, let's put that there just to sort of see. So we have a request in line 152 and 153 to add in burden identification strategies, not just reduction strategies. Does anybody object to this inclusion, given that the previous sections include both of these? That's where the thrust of this comment is coming from. Okay, so I think we can keep them. So on 17, the committee asked the Committee on Style take a look at some underlying substantive source material for figuring out what the trigger might be for having a team, a CX team. And so Matt, why don't you tell us about what you and Ben found when you looked into this, and then I'll take comments.
Sure. We couldn't find any clear guidance in the three sources that were identified that would clearly identify what kind of agencies should have or should not have a CX team. We were cognizant of the consultants' focus on benefit providing and service agencies in the report, but thought generally agencies could make this determination for themselves. So we recommended keeping it fairly broad. If the committee is nervous about that, perhaps should consider, or an as appropriate could soften some of the distinction. I was sort of thinking, I would say this to Jeremy a couple of times, even ACUS, if it had a CX team amongst its 11 people staff, could benefit, because our website is often very hard to navigate, and bringing some of that expertise in would be helpful. But obviously that's not in the budget, but that's somewhat outside of what is a best practice, I would say. And that was how we ended up with this.
Okay, so thanks for that. So we spent a little bit of time talking about this substantively last time, but now that we have this background material, as Matt just explained, I think the question is, how does the language look to people? And if generally okay, is the committee comfortable with the more direct should have a team, or is there some call for a should consider or as appropriate? So I'm going to look for some hands. Bill.
Didn't Bernie Bell have a suggestion for this
He did, actually. That was pre-circulated. That is a great point, Bill. Thank you for that. I don't know. Is Bernie here?
He isn't. I just checked.
Bernie will be here at about 2:30.
2:30. Maybe we should leave it till then. But I thought his recommendation sounded really good to me. So
yeah, Matt, what did that not make it into it did not, I mean, it's not in the red line unless it's in a subsequent comment underneath what you pulled up here.
It's not. He didn't provide language, so I copied it as more of as a recommendation for you all to read, but I didn't put it on here. I can get it and put it on here now without any difficulty.
I think it might be helpful, and then it's a reasonable idea if he's coming at 2:30, unless anybody wants to weigh in more now. We could take a beat and come back to this. There's also parallel language about this in the preamble. This is the Bernie language, Matt? Okay.
This is the Bernie language, yes.
Okay. So if he's coming at 2:30, I think let's circle back to this at 2:30, but Matt, can you help me make a note that we'll do that when he comes back? And again, there'll be the parallel language in the preamble, so there'd be an opportunity to go back and forth. Okay, so let's go to 18 then. So there's a comment, I think there's a comment in the margins. No, there's not a comment in the margins. Okay, remind us who this came from. I think this was the idea of,
Olson
not calling.
Suggested adding ombuds in a number of places in the recommendation, and this was one of them. Matt Weiner suggested changing internal stakeholders to relevant staff, and that was probably a more of a committee on style that I should have probably accepted quietly in the background.
Okay, all right. I mean, we did have some discussion about who should be called out here, and I think we had ended up doing it at a higher level of generality for internal stakeholders, but relevant staff, unless people want to go back to the substance of whether we should name people in relevant staff. Okay, so Bill Funk again.
Yeah, one might remember what the original purpose of 18 was, which was to include general counsels so as to make sure that what was done was lawful, right? And therefore it was limited to general counsel and legal staff, not generally people who would have something to say that would be worthwhile. But it was all about legal restrictions and what could be done. And we didn't like the idea of sort of flagging lawyers as being barriers to doing this. So we tried to soften it in various ways. And we so softened it now that the whole original concept has sort of been lost. And frankly, I don't care too much whether we lose that original thought. But I wanted to point that out as being, that we really have changed the whole nature of number 18 by making the changes we made. Yeah, and that Nina's suggested.
So thanks for reminding us of where it came from. I think our substantive goal had been to reduce lawyers as barriers. And so in order to facilitate agency efforts was the language that we put in there. So are you suggesting that that's too soft and you want to strengthen it, or you're just sort of reminding us of where?
Well, the idea is that by putting in ombuds and public advocates, they aren't part of the people who might facilitate in a legal sense, right? Mm-hmm. They're just good people who have something to say and could aid in discussing things. And they should, agencies should involve all sorts of people. But that's the question is, should we call out lawyers in particular because of their particular role? That's the question. Because I think you've really changed it here by adding the ombuds and public advocates.
And so just to make sure I understand, you are raising this as a question rather than advocating for the deletion of the added language. Okay, great. John Kaminsky.
I think I raised the initial flag on this, and to say that there's more than just general counsels that have legal potential opportunities to raise flags early on. And it's not ombuds and public advocates, but rather the Paperwork Reduction Act League, the risk officers, the chief information officers, chief data officers, the privacy officers. Those all have statutory requirements that have the ability to potentially be a barrier. And it's not ombudsmen and public advocates that would be barrier, but rather these other ones, and we're now capturing them under relevant staff. But the idea is include general counsels early. We should include some of the others that have statutory responsibilities that would touch on customer experience and burden reduction. There you go.
Does that capture it, John, with statutory responsibilities related to burden reduction, or is there something broader?
That captures that. I mean, I don't think we should list PRA and CIO and CDO.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yes. And then are you suggesting—
But including general counsels, I think is appropriate. So.
Are you suggesting deleting ombuds
Well, I
and
didn't
public
think that
advocates?
those aren't potential barriers, but
Barriers.
including them early on is fine. It's just that I think that what Bill was trying to get at is the general counsels have legal responsibilities that would touch on administrative burden, and so do some other offices. But it's ombuds and public advocates, I think, are leaving it in is fine. I wouldn't.
So one potential reason to leave them in is because their expertise interfacing with the public might be beneficial for general counsels and others with statutory responsibility to hear. Okay, so Bill.
Well, I hoped somewhere we would have something about how agencies generally should involve everybody who would have something positive to say about burden reduction. And the question is that this number 18? It wasn't originally. Originally, it was the idea of bringing in people early on who otherwise might create burdens. And so if we want to keep that original idea, then you take out the ombuds and public advocates.
Can we scroll back up to where I think Matt Weiner suggested that we use the word consultative rather than consultation or something like that? He turned the noun posing as an adjective into an actual adjective. Do you know what I'm talking about, Matt? Because I think that might be where we call out the, where we call out the consultation in burden identification. So if we have, so I think our choices are, we have called out these people here as valuable in early consultation. To identify burdens? I hear what Bill is saying is that once we've called them out here, it's distracting and maybe counterproductive because it makes it seem to keep them also below, because it might make it seem that just call on people as opposed to call on people who might be barriers. So I feel a little bit like it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other from the sense of the room. And I'm just trying to get a sense of which way people would rather lean. So can I have a few more comments on this? Bridget?
I can be curious to know the sense of the committee in terms of whether we should try to nudge general counsels to be more supportive of this in their legal interpretations, or whether we feel like that's just not our business, not our role to try to push agency counsels to do that. Because I feel like we're kind of like, if the answer is we're not comfortable pushing them, then I think we can even just get rid of something like 18, but if we want to push them, we should push them. And if we aren't comfortable pushing them, then we should just stop torturing ourselves.
Okay. So I think the sense of the committee last time was very much towards pushing them. I think we spent a lot of time wordsmithing around this to try to make it clear that we weren't pushing them to be illegal, but pushing them to reduce barriers. So, okay, let me call on Conway.
Yes, I mean, to the discussion that we had last week, I'm for keeping the focus on general counsels here, because I think that's an important barrier. And if ombuds are mentioned elsewhere, I would keep that elsewhere. Okay,
thanks. Amy?
I just wanted to clarify a bit. Instead of thinking, I think what the report, what we were coming up with was the timeliness of it as opposed to the pushiness of it. So the early, get them in the room early, so that not so much, so that all reduction efforts can be as efficient as possible, so that you don't, spin wheels and get program folks doing something that then turns out to have legal problems. So it's really, I think, about the general counsels who might be seen as gatekeepers at the end, get them in from day one.
Okay, and so given that, are you comfortable with both deleting ombuds and public advocates, because the report supports that, and keeping the rest of it the way it is now with this additional language about who the relevant staff are?
I'm not sure it's my call to make.
No, it's not. But like as a consultant, like the recommendations are supposed to be supported by the report.
Right.
So just
right. I think the focus was really on the legal staff, getting the legal staff in with program folks as early as possible.
Okay. All right. David.
So I'm for cutting out the ombuds and public advocates here. I am curious whether people think that the relevant staff with statutory responsibilities is clear enough in terms of who we're referring to, right? So John had a nice list. I don't want to include a list, but I will say that if I read this, I wouldn't know exactly who was being referred to as having statutory responsibilities related to burden reduction. If you say privacy officer, something like that, then I'd be, oh, okay, yeah, now I know who you're talking about. I just wonder whether agencies are going to know who this group is that we're talking about.
And so, David, would that suggest that you have a parenthetical after this new purple phrase, such as privacy officers?
Yeah, I just say, for example, and then give an example.
Okay, all right. Okay.
But it may be clear to others. That's just, it may be me.
Okay, Steph.
I do think it's helpful to engage other officials, the privacy officials, chief data officers, paperwork reduction and clearance officers early in the process, so that they can, likewise avoid coming in at the last minute to raise issues that folks didn't anticipate.
So do you want to add to the list? And if so, who else would you call out?
I think you could say Paperwork Reduction Act clearance officers or chief data officers. And then I guess, I'm not sure if privacy officer is the technical term, so I wonder if we should refer that to the Committee on Stat Help before this.
Okay. Okay, and perhaps that could be in a parenthetical, Matt. Bill Funk, I saw your hand was up and then I saw it go down. I'm not sure if it was old up or if people said what you needed to say, but I want to just make sure.
People said what I needed to say.
People said what you needed to say. Okay, great. Okay, so I think I'm hearing basically a preference for deleting the ombuds and public advocates from here. I think if they were inserted by Nina, I don't think Nina's on the line right now, is she? Otherwise yeah, okay, I would have called on her before. But I think I think the sense of the committee is we've already called them out where they actually need to be. And this is the thrust of this recommendation is a different recommendation. And so I think the Committee on Style can sort of massage this where the parentheses are placed. But if people are comfortable generally with the substance of 18, I think we can move on, but I will just pause for a minute to just see if anybody wants to get a hand up. Okay. So then are people okay with keeping the title of this? Go back up a little bit, Matt, just its responsibilities and, okay, David, I see your hand up.
Okay, so this is just a point of clarification for me.
Yeah.
What is the difference between this section and the previous section? Or what is it intended to be? So there's a subtitle here. It's not clear to me what distinguishes the previous section from this section. And this gets to Bill's point.
Okay, so thank you, Matt, for scrolling back up. So before burden reduction strategies comes burden identification strategies, and then burden reduction strategies, and then go back to where we are. So David, I think part of what's going on here, especially if we add identification strategies to number 16, it's now sort of meant to refer back to both. And customer experience teams could cover both because they would have they would have information from identification and reduction. And I guess 18 only does refer to burden reduction right now. So with that, do you want to propose either a different title or moving 18 or?
I was afraid you were going to ask that. I mean, so it sounds like what we're saying is organizing for identification and reduction. But what distinguishes this is that we're making recommendations for our agency should organize to do those things. Or am I getting that wrong? Like I see that, like, you're trying to say there's identification, there's reduction, and these don't fit neatly into either of those sections, right? I think that's sort of the gist of it. But I'm not going to make a fuss, but it doesn't naturally flow to me in terms of because we're giving a series of agency responsibilities before this, right? And so if it's just agency responsibilities and you've given me a series of responsibilities already.
Right. Can you take us, well, before I ask to be taken back earlier to see if some of this could be moved even earlier, let me call on Steph.
So if I recall the rest of these recommendations, like the focus was on the political appointees and senior leaders, so agency senior leaders. And so I wonder if the title could instead encapsulate that. So maybe agency senior leader responsibilities, and then that would more clearly distinguish it from below or from above, I mean, sorry.
Right. And I think that is part of what the effort was here. And I think the report, if I'm recalling correctly, does talk about leadership as being an important way to instantiate this. Amy, I see you, I think, nodding. So I think that might be part of where this is coming from. I don't know if you want to say anything. Oh, and Don is on the line too.
Yes, I think there is an idea here of the senior leadership. I think organization is really like internal agency, how agencies will structure themselves. I mean, I guess that would be senior leadership kind of guiding that role, but different from kind of the responsibilities outward facing.
Okay. Once we add senior leader in, though, it doesn't really modify organization in the same way. So then that becomes a little weird. Yes. Bill Funk.
I might suggest going back to the original title, which was agency organization. And it was complained that number 16 was an organization. And so we put in responsibilities and took out organization. But 17 and 18 are clearly organizational type of concepts. And what 16 is all about, I mean, what the purpose of it was all around the word prioritize, right? That's what we're trying to get across, to make this a big deal. And I'd call that organization. At least I'd be happy to leave it with a simple title like agency organization to do that.
Okay. I feel that either of these perfectly fine captures either what we had before or what Bill has edited us towards. I suppose thumb on the scale, ACUS often prefers fewer words than more words. So possibly this is kind of more in line with the general ACUS vibe, but I welcome thoughts from the committee before we move on. If anybody feels strongly about the reverting to the previous red line that we had on the screen. Go, Dave. Go
yeah, I like this better.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm okay with it, like fudging priorities into organization. That's fine for me too.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I think unless I see big complaints with like a huge show of hands right now, I'm happy to move on to the next subset of things. I am taking a beat though to see if anybody would like to do that. Okay, let's move on then. So agency collaboration. So we have dropped in a comment from our very first meeting from John, I believe, although possibly, where is that showing up? The one about like cumulative burden? That was here. We cut and pasted that here. Cumulative burden reduction. Okay. So that's just a note from Ben from our previous meeting. So show us the title one more time, Matt. The title of this section is called Agency Collaboration. Okay, so, and can you scroll us through just so that we can have a big picture overview? So 19 is about collaboration. We also started here with data sharing, and then we have some extra comments on that. And then we have a chief data officer. So it's really only 2 at this point. Who suggested cutting 20, Matt? That's not reflected in the...
That's John.
That's John. Okay, all right. So John, go ahead. I'll call on you first then.
Okay. Just agencies typically don't like to collaborate, and it's sort of a disincentive to collaborate if you say, well, why don't you collaborate and also collect data and report it to nobody? I mean, so it just feels like you're adding a burden on agencies to collaborate. So it's just, I like it conceptually, But I think that in practice, it discourages agencies from wanting to collaborate because it creates extra work for them.
I think we had another comment from somebody at an agency last time whose name I'm not recalling right now, to that effect. I mean, this was just like in the last 5 minutes of our meeting last time, so we didn't really get to discuss it. I don't know if that person is on the line, but I do not see a hand popping up to identify herself as such. So Steph, I'll call on you.
Yeah, it was not me, but I tend to agree with that. And I think, you know, one of the things that we struggle with is folks already feel that the cost benefit analysis of these programs is onerous. And so to say, not only do you have to do an ex ante cost benefit analysis, but you also have to do like an ex post and then analyze it, does feel even more onerous when folks already complain about the onerousness of the ex ante.
So let me make sure I understand the thrust of these comments, though. Are they both at justifications for deleting number 20?
Yes.
Okay, and John, I'm just looking for a nod. Okay, all right. So unless anybody wants to speak up in favor of number 20, I think we will let number 20 die its redlined death. Okay, so then the question is, John, you also had comments about 19. And so do you want to, and there's a whole bunch of changes here also. So
I thought we've resolved that. My thing was that cross-agency priority goals wasn't quite the right
way. And so we deleted that. Okay. And
yeah.
So great. So I just wasn't sure why there's all these redlinings still.
Yeah.
Matt, do you recall why, is it separately added? I have the same memory as John, so I'm just trying to remember why.
My sense was we were like kind of halfway through this one as a whole, so I just left everything as it was.
Okay, great. I think that's actually true because we hadn't quite figured out what we wanted to say about data sharing. And then I think if you scroll to the above comments, somebody proposed dangerous concerns about, or sort of concerns about the danger of data sharing that should, Nina, right? Okay, so, and Nina's not here, but she is the one who proposed this within the confines of the law and raised worries about what data sharing could do. And so I'll give folks a minute to just take a look at that and see whether people want to speak in favor of or otherwise comment on the proposals on the screen. We did not really ever talk about the A through C proposals at 171 through 176. Okay, so Don, I'll call on you first to just shape what you were trying to do here as the consultant, and then I'll go to Steph and then John.
Just on line 170 and edit to collaborate on, when you struck out to seek, it just collaborate. It's just
okay.
Right here.
Thanks for that, John. Okay, Don Moynihan.
Yeah, so this is more in response to Nina's comments, and she gave examples of robo-debt in Australia, childcare reimbursements in the Netherlands. And I think in both those cases, much of the data sharing was actually legal. And so I'm not sure that within the confines of the law is the correct framework for understanding the problems that emerge in those settings. But it's also the case, those are two places where data sharing is a lot easier than in the United States. I think, if there was a principle here that we wanted to caution about the use of data sharing, it would be data sharing that would not disadvantage the individual, but would help them in some fashion. And so I think generally most people have no problem with data sharing when it helps them, but they are concerned about data sharing when it's used by government officials in punitive ways.
Okay.
More detail than we want to include in the report, but I think the spirit that Nina is raising is we don't want data sharing for bad things. We want data sharing for good things. but that there's sort of a level of detail there I'm not sure we would be able to get into.
Matt, can you just do a placeholder for something like risk to the individual or something? And I think I can also anticipate within the confines of the law being struck on the floor, because I think somebody will say all ACUS assumptions are to be within the confines of the law. So there's that as well. Steph.
So I understand Nina's concern, and frankly, I think it's one that is well-founded. You know, I don't know that the intent of use for the information can always protect data from negative consequences. And the way, and I'm not a privacy expert, so I apologize to any of you who might be, but the way that I believe that the federal privacy system deals with this is through the application of the Fair Information Practice principles, which were originally adopted by HHS, but I think have been broadened to be something that each of the agencies should consider. So, you know, when you have information about individuals, the principles are that you should consider accountability, authority, minimization of the collection of data, individual participation, the ability to correct your record, for example, purpose specification and use limitation, and then security. So some of these things that address concerns sort of when the data is in the hands of the agency beyond the agency's and to think about outsider threats. And so I wonder if, you know, we could reference the Fair Information Practice principles in lieu of the confines of law.
Great. So I was just going to ask if there was another thing on data protection of individuals that ACUS had done, but these fair privacy principles make sort of even broader substantive. Yeah. So say them one more time, and Matt will capture them.
Fair Information Practice principles. They're called the FIPS.
Great, and then we'll get a citation there. Okay, thanks for that, Steph. Bill.
This is really in the wrong place. It's not a question of the collaboration being consistent with this stuff. It's the next sentence. In particular, agencies should work with agencies to seek ways to share data across federal agencies and between federal and state agencies, consistent with Fair Information Practice principles.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you for spotting that. Okay. So I think we're prepared to accept the beginning part of 19. So now, does anybody have any comments on A, B, and C? Okay, John, where does your comment on the side go to? Does this is still for 20 that we have already deleted, old 20? For measures and I think it does. Yeah. Okay, so let's resolve that.
We dealt with.
Yeah, we dealt with that. Okay, so let's delete that. Okay, Don Moynihan.
I would, and Amy can contradict me if I'm wrong here, but I would say under C, if we mention automatic enrollment, we should also add and renewal, because there are cases where people have to renew on an automatic basis each year. And I think when we use the language automatic enrollment, we sometimes assume that's included, but it would be good to distinguish between the first time you apply for something versus annual renewal processes.
Great. I'll note that this list isn't really in the shape of a recommendation as much as an explanation of why agencies might want to do it. I don't know if people object to that, want to reshape it into a recommendation. Agencies should consider data sharing agreements in order to, or something like that. That I think that would be more consistent with ACUS style. But I see a few nods, but I welcome thoughts either on substance or structuring of this. Okay, I'm mostly seeing nods. All right, so are there any other substantive suggestions or comments on A, B, and C? Great. Let's go to 20, new 20. John, I think you had, is this where you also had this agency should establish comment that we have deleted?
No,
Or that was for the next thing?
You know, this one here is that it said agencies should establish, and it didn't say. It's hard to get agencies to establish across agencies. An individual at agency directive, I can see directing or having a recommendation to individual agencies, but when you have a recommendation to a group of agencies, somebody needs to be in charge or something. So what I suggest is reworking this is to work with their chief data officers to establish cross-agency working groups, because there's already a cross-agency working group among chief data officers to do this.
Great. So then do we even want it to be to establish cross-agency working groups, or agencies should work with their chief data officers in already established, you know?
Well, the chief data officers are focusing on sharing data. Their focus is not reducing administrative burden. So it's including them or leveraging their existing network. So they probably aren't thinking about reducing burden.
Well, what if we just delete though the cross-agency working groups and then just leave it as should work with their chief data officers to share information, leaving it up to them since they already have these networks that you're talking about.
Okay, yeah.
Does anybody else
share information across agencies?
Yes, to share information across agencies.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to comment on this? Bill?
I think it's worthwhile to put in to work with their chief data officers in cross-agency working groups to share information across agency. I mean, rather than sort of on their own to do something, but identify.
Sure. Okay, and great. That captures the broad substance of what John was talking about as well. So that's helpful. Okay, anyone else on 20 before we move on? Great. All right, so let's now move to the next. And I think, is it the last or did we break out? We have one more header. Matt, can you just scroll us down? I think there's maybe a suggestion from someone that the OMB gets its own header.
Section.
This is its own. Okay.
Matt Wiener suggested having an OMB section, which if we accepted Steph's edits would be a section of 1 recommendation, and then a Condra section, which would be a section of 2.
Okay, great. So we'll just work through these in order and then those will come up automatically. Okay, thanks for that. So currently this is called Guidance on Conducting Customer Experience Research. Let us leave that as a placeholder, but please let us circle back to this once we work through the substance of what these things are. So many things are crossed out, and I think it is Steph whose comment has suggested crossing these out and replacing them with, and the language that Steph is offering to replace now begins at 195. So Steph, could I ask you to explain your recommendations to cross out what's crossed out and to add what's added?
Yeah, absolutely. So we tried very hard to capture the concepts in the original recommendations, but tweaked them in a way that would make them easier for us to implement. So some of the tweaks were just to remove guidance that we felt like was overly specific. So if you scroll up, for example, discussing the way that you would calculate burden, which is something that we already do for the PRA, or updating our privacy guidance, we weren't even sure exactly what guidance that was. In terms of the cost benefit analyses, that's an area where agencies have told us they already feel a lot of burden. So we were a little nervous about saying, here are additional things that you have to do there, and wanted to take that in a more general direction, saying like we can provide guidance on the advantages and disadvantages of data sharing. And then in the PRA, we feel like we can provide guidance there on using existing flexibilities and expanding the use of existing flexibilities. So perhaps we want to say expanding in the substitute. But the intent really wasn't to reject any of the recommendations, but to reframe them put it all in one single recommendation and then work with ACUS to implement them because they're perfect.
Great, thank you. That's a really helpful overview. Okay, so comments on the proposals for revision. Bill Funk.
I understand why OMB would prefer the substitute, and I don't have any particular objections to it, but I would like to hear from the reporters, who I assume are really the basis for the specific recommendations that we've deleted, right? The ones that OMB would rather make more flexible in general, and whether or not they think, whether the reporters think that the specificity of those recommendations is important because otherwise they think OMB won't be doing the right thing.
Thanks for posing that question, Bill. So Don Moynihan and Amy Woodman, I will call on whichever one of you would like to speak.
So we haven't discussed this, so you should assume our comments are independent of each other. So I'm comfortable with all of the language that has been proposed. I think what is maybe substantively different, and that what we try to get across, maybe not successfully in the report, is the idea that there is some difference between the agency perspective and OMB perspective on the ability of agencies to do user research in a way that's easy. And so, I think what my interpretation was agencies would like it to be easier for them to do user research, and OMB generally doesn't see that as a problem or a constraint. And so there's a difference in perspective there. And so I worry a little bit that if we, just delegate to OMB to give more guidance about how to do this better, we're not fully incorporating the agency perspective there. And, in some ways, I think it would be ideal if we actually had better data on this, on like just how much agencies feel that this is onerous. But yeah, I think that's the main distinction that bothers me between the original version and the proposed versions. I think all of the other changes are helpful. Amy, do you want to?
Actually, Don, before I call on Amy, and then I'll go back to Steph, can I just ask a clarifying question of you, Don, which is, would one way to capture what you are saying now in language be after guidance in line 196 to give a in order to language, like in order to make agency conducting customer research easier? That's not good language, good phrasing, but would that capture the intent of what you were going for? Because it sounds like you were sort of missing the specific thrust.
I think that would help. I think the sort of the difference in perspective is that OMB generally thinks it's not too onerous for you to do user research, and I think agencies expressed greater concern about the ease of doing this.
Okay, let me call on Amy, and then I'll call on Steph. Amy, do you want to add to?
Yeah.
Or?
I just wanted to add, there was something I can't see on the screen now, but the Privacy Act guidance, what we're referring to there that Steph said they couldn't figure was the 2011, it's M1102, which is, I think, the most recent Privacy Act, like data sharing guidance from OMB. That's a specific thing we were hoping could be updated with a little bit of examples, because a lot has happened since 2011 where agencies have incorporated data sharing, to just kind of put a little bit more of a seed of what could be done in the guide, a little bit more of an innovative spin to the guidance than the original guidance was written. So, and I think that tracks down to B on the language that Steph proposed, but I just wanted to, I think that that's somewhat of a different bucket than the user research.
And so then it sounds like you would suggest not having that in order to make agency conducting consumer reach up at the preamble for 21, but have it be in one of the specifics A, B, or C. And then you would like this other call out of the Privacy Act guidance Is that right?
I think
In
that
B.
what you have highlighted really goes to C probably.
Okay.
And
great.
B, talking about a different set of guidance from O and B.
Okay. Okay, great. So before I call on Steph, let's just get this captured. So Matt, it sounds like Amy thinks that the in order to language you just cut and pasted goes there. And then Amy, could you just say one more time, you want to have examination of the potential advantages and disadvantages of administrative data sharing?
The idea was, the original, I think, thrust of the report was that specifically asking OMB to update its 2011 guidance document on interpreting the Privacy Act to include more positive initiatives and benefits captured.
Great. So
data sharing.
So we want like yeah, okay. In particular, great. This is what I was just gonna suggest, some version of that. But do you want to call out the guidance, or are you saying it's fine to?
It's my sense that that's the most recent guidance. So I mean, I don't know that we need to call it out, but just to update.
Okay.
It could be a new. It just
okay. Thanks for that to both of you. Okay, so Steph, let's now go back to you, but then I really would welcome other thoughts from other committee members. Steph.
I think that these edits are all fine. I have no concerns with them. I would have concerns with reintroducing M1102 and telling us to update it. First, because it was not prepared by our privacy official. So we don't think of it internally as privacy guidance. And, you know, I can't commit to updating specific memos in the way that that's an overly specific recommendation I'm trying to implement. I can commit to offering guidance on this, but I need a little bit of flexibility, I think, to make this realistic and workable in the real world. And then, you know, to Don's point, I don't disagree that agencies have had challenges conducting customer experience research. And I actually drafted a memo to the committee that was short, 2 pages, sort of describing what we've been doing to try and address this concern, but acknowledging that we have focused on high impact service providers and may have left other agencies behind. So I think that is a growth area for us. And so I'm fine with saying, in order to make agency conduct of consumer research easier, you know, whatever the appropriate language is there. I think you could also, in the preamble, we have the expanding use of flexibility, so we could add the expanding language here as well. So I don't want to disagree with Don. I think we're aware of the agency concern and willing to work with agencies on that.
Okay, thanks for that. Nina, welcome. It's great to see you, and you're recognized.
Thank you, and I apologize for getting here late and missing last week's meeting. I just want to note, I would be in the description above, there was the use of data sharing within current authority or statutory authority, and I would really like to see that language in 21B. Or wherever we're using the term data sharing. Coming from the IRS, I am, you know, a hardliner about the IRS data and the protection thereof, and it being used only in appropriate instances and for appropriate purposes. So I think when we talk about data sharing, we need to put it in the context of statutory authority. And then if Congress wants to expand the statutory authority, that's Congress's call.
Okay, so we did just take it out above and change the language above on the principle that the goal of the previous language was about, I actually have lost the thread which one it was about.
Well, I just wanted,
you want it somewhere. You want it somewhere.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
great. So it's now on the screen as a proposal here, and let's not revisit what it is above.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about above.
Right, let's assess what's here now. Okay,
right.
Thanks for that, Nina. Okay, so I'll call on Jim, and then I'll call on Bill Funk.
Hello.
Hi, Jim. Yes, we can hear you.
Given these changes in 21, what concerns remain if those were adopted that haven't been addressed? I was not clear, because it appears that the only one potential one was that OMB was trying to coach the agencies to do more than they wanted to do. And that's nothing new. So I'm not clear if you take all these changes, what is missing from what was written before.
I think Steph's point, although I don't really need to speak to her for her, but I think Steph's point was just that she wanted OMB to have more flexibility in exactly how they address stuff. So I don't think anything is missing if I'm understanding both Steph and the consultants reporting from nothing substantive is missing. It's just the specifics, like direction to OMB. And I see some nods. Steph, I will call on you.
Yes, I do want to admit that we wanted to broaden the discussion of data sharing to take it out of the niche application and cost benefit analyses to the broader potential advantages and disadvantages, because we think it's not specific to privacy. It could be addressed more broadly. And then, to Nina's point, we'd also, in addition to discussing the advantages, we'd want to discuss the fair information practice principles and risks of data sharing.
Well, I'm not clear what the downside is of that.
I hope there's none.
The downside of the data sharing or the downside of what we have right here?
The downside of the recommendation.
Nobody is suggesting one right now.
Oh, okay. There's agreement.
There's agreement. Yeah.
Okay.
No, there's agreement. Unless Bill Funk is going to throw a wrench in the works. Bill, I recognize you.
I hope it's not a wrench. I mean, Eloise, you've expressed the view that that the council or the conference is likely to delete within the confines of the law because everything has to be within the confines of the law. And Nina, in your comments, you had an alternative phraseology besides within the confines of the law, something about the extent the law and policy dictates otherwise or something. And I was just wondering if we couldn't, if it's important to avoid using language that's likely to be struck, if we could segue it, in some other way.
I mean, so I did make that point before you got on the call, just because that's been struck, I think, a fair amount. That's a common concern I hear. So how do you feel about Bill's reference to your other alternative phrasing?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I feel like just wherever we discuss this or regularly where we discuss this, we, do a caveat. And I don't think it's surplusage if you include policy, because there may be some things that are permissible by law, but when you do your analysis, you decide that policy considerations would mean you wouldn't do data sharing in this place, or you would limit the data sharing. And I just think flagging that is very important. And I think that's also the case, as ACUS is working on recommendations about artificial intelligence and use of data, the recommendations that have been adopted by ACUS in the past. There's always been some caveat of the inappropriate use of data, or using data that's not fit for purpose, for the application that it wasn't collected for. I think we need to flag that.
Great. So I think there's also agreement here, although I do think the way the language, although again, Steph, I see your hand and I'm going to call on you in a second. I think grammatically the sentence doesn't work anymore. So I think it should say something like examination of the potential advantages and disadvantages of administrative data sharing to the extent law and policy allow or provide or dictate or something like that.
Well,
I would say provide.
The examination. I mean, the law and policy doesn't dictate not examining. It's a question of what you adopt. So it's sort of like the disadvantages. What might be disadvantages, legal or policy considerations, potential advantages and legal or policy disadvantages.
Incorporate, so examination of the potential advantages. And
I'd leave it to the style people to figure out how to say it. But
I'm comfortable with that. Thank you for that. Matt, could you make a note for the Committee on Style to circle back? Steph, did you want to speak still? You're comfortable with, okay, Great. Okay, I think we have then reached some agreement on 21 A, B, and C. I am going to just pause for a beat to see if anybody wants to get their hands up again. Okay, so let's go to 22 after Matt finishes typing. We're not in the preamble yet. Okay, so 22 and 23 are now the last recommendations. So this is a bold proposal to amend the PRA. The floor is open for comment. Is Claire Green here? No, but Conway, you speak for Claire, right? So let's get you and then I'll call on John.
Sure, yes. I think that the prior 21C speaks to what we think is good and already exists, is the existing flexibilities that OMB is reviewing. The intent of the Paperwork Reduction Act, I think is good, and we think is good, and we would want there to be some type of review, not a blanket exception to this type of research, unless there's specific ways that it could be improved. We'd like to review that, but a blanket exception was
disfavored by your office.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so your proposal is just to strike 22 with the idea that 21C incorporates what's good about the thrust of the proposal, but doesn't go overboard. Is that
correct?
A fair? Okay, great. John Kamensky.
Sorry, I wasn't able to get my cursor to move fast enough before you moved. Line 204, it says to conduct consumer research. Do we want to say customer research, since that seems to be the phrase?
I think that was a typo. Yes, thank you for that. Okay, so nothing on the, okay. So I mean, so on the floor, we have now a proposal to just delete 205, 206, 207. Steph.
I don't want to get ahead of the committee in responding to this. So if there are other agencies or folks who would like to speak, I'd be happy to defer to them, but I would like to share thoughts, and I want to know that Bernie had some thoughts as well.
So Bernie, it's not 2:30 yet, so Bernie's not yet on the call. Bernie's comment also is sort of a negative one, though. So maybe I'll rephrase it like this. Does anybody want to speak in favor of retaining the proposal to amend the PRA to exempt customer experience research? Because if not, I think then we don't have any comments in favor. Okay, so Don, why don't you tell us where the consultants were coming from on this?
Yeah, I'll make the case. So again, I think part of what we heard from agencies is that it's hard and slow to do customer experience research. The purpose of the Paperwork Reduction Act was to reduce burdens on the public, but it seems paradoxical that there are processes involved that would allow you to do research to reduce those burdens, right? And I think the reality is we don't actually have good estimates of how consequential those processes are in limiting research. And, if you ask OMB, they will appropriately point to the fact that there are these legal constraints in place. And it's not necessarily clear to me that the intent of the Paperwork Reduction Act was to make it harder for agencies to collect data on paperwork reduction.
Don, can I ask you? So go ahead.
Yeah, no, please go ahead, Eloise.
So I wanted to just ask you to respond to Conway's proposal or Conway's comment, which is that, and Conway, can you just remind us where Claire is,
Sure.
Where you and Claire are?
Yeah, we're from the Social Security Advisory Board. So
okay.
Agency. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So that proposal is from them is that 202, 203, 204, the flexibilities under the PRA currently captures what they're going for. So what is your response to that sort of the broader versus the narrower exemption?
So currently the exceptions under PRA include things like user observation. But if you want to do, broad scale user surveys, those are not exempted by PRA. And there are ways of doing it with help from OMB, but they are not exempted.
Okay, so your thought is that 21C doesn't actually capture what you were hearing from agencies fully because the flexibilities are narrower than what your report shows agencies would benefit from.
I think that's correct, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So
okay, great. So that's the case 4. Okay, so Jim, then Steph, then Bill Funk.
Yes, when you look at that language that it is now, when you amend a PRA or when you amend any statute, but particularly the PRA has a lot more than paperwork in it, you're going to get a lot of attention. And I guess I have several questions. One, I couldn't find any data, and I didn't read it as closely maybe as I should, that showed the magnitude of the problem. How big is that problem that we're speaking about? I couldn't find any data there. Was it 1 or 2, or just how big the problem was? The second thing I couldn't find was absolutely no analysis of what alternatives there are to seeking an amendment, such as any actions that can be taken on this whole wide variety of actions under this type of research, what could be done administratively. So I guess I'm of the opinion, and that is not in the record. I couldn't find any of those very important things before you generally amend a law, is how big the problem is and what can you do to do it administratively, which is one of the basic things before you prepare legislation. So I would, based on that assumption, I would support the previous recommendation that 26 be dropped.
Okay, so let's go to Steph and then Bill Funk. Steph, somehow we're not hearing you.
Apologies, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. We would not support a recommendation to amend the PRA to exempt customer experience for a couple of different reasons, in addition to those already raised by Claire and Bernie. The purpose of the PRA is not just to reduce burden, but it's also to ensure adequate information quality and centralized review and oversight of agency collections of information, both within the agency by the Chief Data Officer and recent amendments to the PRA made by the Evidence Act, as well as by OMB. And we are concerned that if there were across the board exemption for customer experience, that it could lead to a proliferation of low quality customer experience research that wasn't necessarily usable or potentially duplicative customer experience research, both within the agencies and between agencies. So we think that there is, there's potentially a real downside to a full-scale exemption. We do think that there are improvements that could be made to the administrative processes under the PRA, the use of flexibilities to make this more available. But I did want to note that 20 different federal agencies have generic clearances for customer experience research, and we have approved 670 different information collections over the last several years for customer experience research. And I think that some of the complaints that I read about in the New York Times aren't coming from the high impact service providers, but maybe coming from agencies who don't currently enjoy that flexibility. And so, I'm happy to encourage those agencies to open a dialogue with their desk officer about if it's appropriate for them to have those flexibilities as well, and to go out and do training broadly across the government to let people know that there is a customer experience clearance that they could get. I definitely think that we could do more here, but I would not go so far as to exempt collections from the PRA entirely.
Okay, thanks for that, Steph. So I'll call on Bill, I'll call on John, and then I think we're going to have to move on. So at that point, I would ask if anybody on the committee is interested in a kind of moving that 26 be kept back in, whatever the current number is. Then let's hear from that. But I think we have the whole preamble to get through.
I just wanted to say to Don that I think it's captured in C. That is clearly OMB has the authority under the Paperwork Reduction Act to, in essence, exempt, all right, exempt with oversight, as it were. But to take it away completely out, I think 26 is wrong. C is 25, 21C is perfectly good.
John Kaminsky.
2012 ACUS recommendation on the Paperwork Reduction Act recommends that OMB delegate limited authority approval to the agencies instead of everything going through OIRA. And that, I don't know whether we want to mention that, but that captures, I think, what the concept in 21C is of use flexibilities. And I don't think that flexibility has ever been used.
So let me just pause here. We've spent a lot of time on this and we really do have to move on, but let me just see if there's anybody on the committee who wants to speak in favor of retaining this. Because if not, I think the sense of the committee seems to me to be that we'll leave it at 21C. Okay. So thank you, Don, and the consultants for putting it in, but I think the committee's moving towards deleting it and keeping just 21C to capture the intent. Okay, we had one final recommendation, Matt, before we go back to the preamble. And then we have to address the header of this final recommendation. So when developing new legislation that establishes or affects administrative programs, Congress should provide express statutory authority for agencies to share data where beneficial for achieving the goals of the legislation. I don't think we got any pre-submitted comments on this, which suggests to me that we're okay with the language and substance, but I'll just pause just to make sure. Matt, could you scroll down just to make sure those that I'm saying that correctly, that this other comments from, okay, I think those are other notes to us for committee on style and so forth. Okay, so I think we're fine then. I think we'll keep 22 what it is, but we need to fix, sorry, Matt, we need to just fix the guidance on conducting customer experience research. Do we have a comment on this particular header? Oh yeah, so Matt was suggesting we just separate out OMB and Congress, but I think we've now deleted one of the Congress ones and we have one to OMB and one to Congress. I'm not totally sure that the header still captures what the substance of the recommendations are. Steph?
What I was going to say is
yeah,
that
go ahead.
the OMB recommendation is more broad now because it also includes administrative burden reduction and not just customer experience. So.
Right. So, I mean, in keeping with the high level of generality of our other titles, we could just have this be rules for OMB and for Congress. Okay, thumbs up from Steph. Anybody else want to? Okay, so I think unless I hear otherwise, I think that's the level of generality that we're at. Okay, deep breath, everybody. I think we made it through. I think we actually had one, before we go back to the preamble though, I think we had one hangover thing. Were we gonna, there was something we were going to capture about the overall burdens. I think the definitions from Matt, we can just put in based on what we work out in the preamble. So I'm not super concerned about that, but we just had one, you know, Matt, that little list where you had like 4 things we needed. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we captured this. That we've done data sharing, I think. Cumulative burden reduction. John Kaminsky, this was like a old holdover comment from you, but based on our first meeting. And I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to do with that. And then we had a placeholder that we didn't actually really address about risk to the individual, unless we did address it by reference to the fair information practice. So maybe we actually did address it by, so then, okay, Matt, can you delete that? Because we resolved that. So then I'll just make sure, John, that we have captured whatever you wanted to say about cumulative burden reduction, and then I'll call on Bill Funk.
I'm fine with what we've done.
Okay, great. So then let's, Matt, get rid of that, and Bill Funk.
We haven't dealt with number 17.
Okay, thank you for keeping us honest. Number 17, but isn't this the one we were going to go back to when Bernie got on the line at 2:30?
Right. I just wanted to.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's still in my head. Thank you for that. So, and because a lot of this is going to be duplicative with what we do with the preamble, let's just do that. Okay. So my proposal is that instead of waiting 13 minutes for a break, let's take a 5-minute break now as our good transition between recommendations and preamble. We'll come back fresh. We'll start the preamble at 2:23 or thereabouts. Okay, sound good? I'll see you all then. Thanks. Hello, everybody. I am back. Matt, are you here?
I'm here.
Okay, great. I don't know if we stopped recording and therefore have to start recording again, or if we are all good.
Well, we didn't stop recording. I continue to be bad at
Great.
managing recording.
That's totally fine. Just wanted to make sure that we didn't have to remember to get re-recorded. Okay, so we are starting the preamble. We have a bunch of placeholder notes on the title. I think we should do the preamble and then go back to the title. But I will just note that we are not authorized as a committee to actually change the title. So we have to propose changing the title, and then the count, if in fact we want to do that, and then the council makes that final call. But we'll circle back to the title after we work through the preamble substance itself. So we got a few pre-submitted comments on the preamble, but not a ton. And so let's just get the first, these paragraphs up on the screen. I'll give people a chance to take a look. Matt suggested a little edit here. And before we turn to the second page, I'll just give people, where there are more pre-submitted comments, I'll just give people a chance to take a look. And if you have a comment about any of the lines 1 through 17, please get your hand up and I'll call on you. Okay, let's scroll down so that we can see the footnotes too, Matt. Okay, so we just have footnote 1 on the screen now. So John, I see you want to weigh in on note 2. That doesn't come till page 2. So let me just pause here to see if anybody wants to comment on anything on page 1 before I ask Matt to scroll us down to page 2. I think we can accept Matt's comments then to delete that internal phrase. Okay, so hearing no request to chime in on this page, Matt, I will ask you to scroll us down too. So let's go here, and we don't have space. I think we don't have space to get the footnotes as well. But so before we get to the footnotes, we've had this conversation several times now about disproportionate burden. So I want to ask people to pay a special attention to that. And maybe let's do that before we look at the footnotes, John, that you wanted to look at. So Warren, I see you are on the line, and I know you've had some thoughts about how we phrase this. I see, actually, I think Sam Bagensauce is not on the line anymore. Anyway, we've had some back and forth on this language before, and I just want to see how people feel with it. Okay, Warren, I'll call on you.
I still have problems with the reference to historically underserved communities. I don't mind saying such as disabled, the elderly, etc. But again, we took it out of the recommendation.
We did.
And so I think we ought to delete it here as well.
So we could have it be administrative burdens fall disproportionately on certain people, including disabled people. Warren, if I recall correctly, we rephrased some of the earlier language to be about people, not about groups.
Correct.
So how about that proposal on the right now on the screen? Warren, does that
I have no problem with it.
That sits well with you? Okay, great. Any other comments on Matt's proposal as modified right now, with my proposed modification right now? Okay, so Bill Funk?
Well, I had thought that Matt's change sort of addressed Warren's concern because it said certain members of these people. So it wasn't that these groups were disadvantaged. It was that certain members of these groups were disadvantaged. And I thought that was a good change, and to change it to disproportionately on people, including disabled people, the elderly. Now we're in groups, it's not even individuals anymore. So I asked Warren, doesn't certain members of these groups sort of address your concern?
Bill, I think you're absolutely right, and would make this to parallel what we have in the recommendation for the same reason. So we ought to
So,
just fall on certain members of.
let's just check to see what we landed on. Matt, thanks for taking us there. We've made it extremely general. Agencies should try to identify and consult with those who may face disproportionate burdens in accessing agency programs. We didn't even have a list at all. So I think our choice is between whether to leave it as general as we have it in the recommendation, or whether we want to call out individual sets of people. So I'll call on you in a sec, Steph, but Matt, can you just take us back to the paragraph in question? So Steph.
Well, since
We can't hear you, Steph. I think you're on mute.
Well, I could go either way. But
okay, Warren, I'll call. So Warren, I'll call back on you in a second, but right now I've got Steph with a hand up. Go ahead, Steph.
I think maybe one way to address this would be to distinguish between the consultant's findings and the language that the committee itself uses. And so I think that, it's fair to attribute the statements about them falling disproportionately on certain, to historically underserved communities, the elderly, those who English is not their primary language. Like, the consultants found that. So maybe we can just attribute that to the consultants or to the report or to the section of the report that discusses that. And then the committee's own recommendation, the committee's own language, could be more general, having your cake and eating it too. And
so if we do that, then we would add. Go ahead.
In a footnote, in the footnote to the report, and then the finding of the report.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. So thank you, Matt, for noting that. Nina.
I think Steph's suggestion is really excellent, and I really would have concerns eliminating the language about the historically, if we can go back up, the historically underserved communities. I mean, that language includes members of tribal nations that have trauma and great distrust of the federal government. And I think identifying that some of those burdens fall on them because of any number of reasons, without spelling them out, but historically underserved is a proxy for some of those communities and members of those communities, very important language. And I would have a hard time if in the preface we eliminated that.
Okay, thanks for that. And I know Matt is not here, but I'll just call out his comment in the margin is that historically underserved communities is a term of art from the executive order. And so it doesn't include, the parenthetical includes one subset of people from those called out in the executive order, but then the other people on the list are other groups. And I think Steph would say that the consultants found. Okay, so Warren, does that capture? Okay, great.
Well, so, I thought we had already gone through that when we amended the recommendation. And I thought now all we were doing was conforming the text to what the group has voted on twice already.
Right. So I think what we're doing in the preamble is sometimes when we voted on things in the recommendations, we said, and we will sort of explain what we mean more in the preamble. So I think that's the distinction that's going on here now. So the
So
question
we
is, what do you make of this sentence now?
Why don't you read the sentence that we're talking about?
Sure. So the proposal is for the following sentence with a footnote to the consultant's report that actually has findings to this effect. Administrative burdens fall disproportionately on certain members of historically underserved communities, including disabled people, the elderly, those for whom English is not their primary language, and persons of limited literacy. And then there would be a footnote to the report that finds, with these factual findings. And then that's different from the recommendation that we voted on, last time or the time before, that doesn't use any language about groups and just says, the language that we just looked at, administrative burdens don't fall equally on all members of the public in the recommendation.
Well, my concern always was that I didn't know what we meant by historically underserved communities, and it could be so broadly interpreted by different people that we were better off just addressing individuals. And that's the way it came out in the recommendation itself. So I would still urge, in a footnote, if you want to describe what was found, fine, but I wouldn't leave it in the text of the preamble.
Okay, so can I
outvoted before?
Say again?
I've been outvoted before, but that's my
okay. All right. I mean, I don't know that it necessarily needs to come to a vote here. We will have a vote on the whole thing at the end. But so I think if the concern is that it's so broad to not know what would be referred to, that's why we modified the language in the recommendation. And that's where agencies really have to understand what the direction is. This one is just sort of a statement of what the report actually found with the citation to the report that explains exactly what was found. So I think that's what's going on here. Let me call in John Kaminsky.
There's an executive order that describes and defines what historically underserved communities are. This is not something we need to define here, but I think using the term, it means something to agencies.
What is the definition?
I do not have the definition in hand, but the executive order does.
Jeff, do you happen to know? Not to cold call you.
I have it.
Yeah, okay.
The term underserved communities refers to populations sharing a particular characteristic as well as geographic communities that have been systematically denied a full opportunity to participate in aspects of economic, social, and civic life as exemplified by the list in the preceding definition of equity. And the preceding definition includes Black, Latino, Indigenous, and Native American persons, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, other persons of color, members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, transgender, queer, persons with disabilities, persons who live in the rural areas, persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality.
And then Matt's point in the...
Yeah, everybody except who's on this committee.
Matt's point in the comments is that definition still doesn't include the elderly who may face disproportionate burdens. And so that's why he proposed adding them in here. And it doesn't include...
I like Professor Funk's reference to certain members of,
That's what it says. That's what
it now says. It has that language. I think we may have resolved where on your concern because it does include, it references the certain members.
Well, that's fine. But when you read that definition of historically underserved communities, you're talking about the world, and we're trying to identify real individuals with problems, not characterizing all these groups as people in essence who are being underserved.
I think we may then capture this by citing just to the consultant's report, because the consultant's report is the one that documents these findings particular to administrative burden. So once we have that, then I think we might be satisfying all of the different kind of goals that people are voicing now. So my proposal is that, say again, Warren?
Well, I don't recall the report, but did it go to individuals or did it indicate that all members of these groups have been underserved.
Don Moynihan and Amy Widman, I will call on you to say something about the findings that we propose to cite to about disproportionate burden in response to Warren's question.
I think you can find studies for programs where the specific group's name have been underserved. So I think you could give examples of that. I don't have a strong preference one way or the other about how we want to frame this. So partly because there are many different groups and there are many different programs, it's hard to say for sure, like each of these groups has been underserved in exactly the same way. But there are certainly cases where in general, you would find that certain groups and members of those groups have not been served reasonably well. And
I think the point that we're asking just a little more precisely, Don, is could we cite to the report for this proposition? I don't think we're talking about citing external studies. The question is just like, do you have findings in the report that could be cited?
In terms of the specific language, I would say of historically underserved communities, yeah, I think you could cite a report. I'm not sure if about certain members, because that language feels not specific enough to me. Then I sort of ask about, well, which members of those groups. But yeah, I think there's in the report materials that would support the rest of the sentence.
Okay, so my proposal then is we try to resolve this just with the footnote to the report. And so we have the language about certain members, which is individualistic. We have the language of kind of the disabled, the elderly, those for whom English is not their primary language, persons of limited literacy, the historically underserved, can be backed up with the report. And then this is not directing to any agency. This is just describing what's in the report as to the burdens. So unless I hear, we understand the concerns that people have raised so far about kind of back and forth here, but I think this kind of is the best balance for what I'm hearing on the screen. So that will be my proposal, unless I hear, unless people start raising hands and objecting to what this kind of balance is. Conway.
Oh yeah, I'm fine with this. I just, maybe committee on sale, I don't understand why we're putting the parenthetical, including disabled people, and then listing the others.
I think it's because disabled people, this was from Matt's comment, are part of the term of art of historically underserved communities in the executive order, and the others are not. So I actually wonder if it would then be helpful to alleviate a concern like that, to drop a footnote to the EO that defines historically underserved. Yeah, which is there. And then also
often at the board, we get around this issue by citing the executive order specifically when talking about historically underserved communities and agreeing on that as a common definition. So that would be
right. I think the suggestion for Matt was that there are other groups that are supported by, not groups, other individuals who might have certain characteristics like the elderly that the report justifies finding for burdens that are not included in that term of art. And so Matt's suggestion was that we not just rely only on the definition in the term.
The consultant report addresses elderly specifically.
I think that's what I was just asking Don, who I think was saying.
I remember certainly a focus on people with disabilities, but I just didn't know if the elderly was. I mean, certainly English and limited literacy, I often see in a list, but the elderly is not often in that list.
The elderly is not in the list. Elderly is not in the list.
Yeah.
And that's why. And so Matt was suggesting for example, citing to Cass Sunstein's work on sludge, that elderly people, while not called out in that term of art definition, are nonetheless important subjects of administrative burden that we might want to be cognizant of. So I think that's where Matt's proposal came from. Okay, so Jim, Tosi, and then Dave Lewis.
Support keeping the elderly in there. That's very important. They're all good furry friends of mine.
Thank you for that comment. Dave.
Yeah, I think that the reason that the elderly is in there is because like some very high percentage of SNAP recipients are elderly, and they're particularly vulnerable to renewal requirements and things like that. And the burdens of learning costs fall heavily on elderly who don't have access to online sources and things like that, and have a difficult time navigating the process. And so they're a particular group that is outside the historically underserved communities that are affected by these administrative burdens.
Okay,
that's
thanks.
in the Hurd and Moynihan book. That's the basis for the committee report.
Great. So actually, we could cite to the book in addition to the report if we need to, in terms of findings that are out there. Okay, Don, I will call on you, and then I think that my proposal is that we have settled on something that's generally acceptable to the overall committee.
Thanks. I don't know where they would fall in this, but there's also significant evidence of that people with poor physical and mental health struggle more with burdens, and whether we want to specify those also as a subcategory of individuals, or whether that ends up making it too broad.
So Conway, is your hand up from before or a new?
Oh, sorry, that was up from before. I'm good with as is.
Okay. So does anybody object to calling out people with poor physical or mental health? Okay, so my current proposal then is that we take this as a statement of findings from the report and from the Hurd and Moynihan book. We provide specific citations in the footnote, and we retain the definition in the executive order for the term of art, so that we're sort of capturing why we're coming up with what we're coming up with. And then the background language in the preamble is the specific language that also talks about members, not overly relying on groups, but the specific language in the recommendation leaves it much more general so that agencies can figure out what is relevant to their own programs. So that's where I think we're landing, and I'm sort of prepared, unless people, again, put lots of hands up and stop us from walking away on this. I think this is where we are. So I'm going to just pause for a beat to make sure that's where we are. Okay. So thanks for that, Amy.
I'm sorry, and I hate to do this. If we're referring to specific findings, there is a connection with low income, and especially with the legal representation points that we made. So I don't know if that's something we want to call out. I'm kind of agnostic. I just wanted to put it out there. If we're relying on specific findings within the report, that would be a particular community on that aspect.
My own worry here.
I would
sorry,
say that
Warren?
Those people are already in the executive order.
That's kind of what that's exactly what I was going to say, Bill.
Communities.
I was going to say that I don't think we are, there's an including phrase in the parenthetical, and I think the footnote to the definitions in the executive order are going to cover that. And I think the more people we start listing, the more questions, right? Like it becomes less useful. So my take is that I think maybe where we are on the screen is where we should stay. Warren, last comment.
We're talking about certain members of, and then the groups were so broad. I could see where we've identified specific characteristics, but those characteristics are across all groups. Given the broad nature of the definition, are we saying that members of LGBTQ community have their own unique problems separate from everyone else who's elderly or infirm or poor or whatnot. Again, I keep coming back to the point that I don't see that broad definition, which encompasses almost everyone, as really being of much value in terms of talking about specific burdens faced by specific people for specific reasons. You don't have a burden or a problem because you're a member of any of the groups that are in the definition, but you have it because of the characteristics you have and the fact that you're a member of the group, whether it's a race or religion or whatnot, really isn't the determining factor on how the agency can do more to help you.
So I think, Warren, I think we've sort of reached the end of where we're going to get with this back and forth. My sense is that we're trying to rely in this sentence on findings. And so what we'll do is we'll go to the book and we'll go to the report and we'll retain here the language that can be specifically supported with page numbers and findings from what those books are. And I think we're trying to capture, the committee's trying to capture your concern here with the language of members of, which retains the focus on the individual, which while still calling out individual characteristics that might be related to some form of group identity as documented in the various studies that we're relying on. Again, that's separate from the recommendation, which we landed at a much more general language that took out any of the specific references. So I think that's where we are. And I think also it's 2:50, and I think we probably have to move on here. So we can take it to a vote, Warren, if you want us to, but I think we're probably, I think this is sort of where the committee has landed overall.
Okay. Then
okay.
Proceed.
Okay, so then I think we'll move on. Moving on, however, requires moving back up a little bit because John Kamensky wanted to be recognized. No, still on the second page for something on a footnote or two. So John, did you want to comment on the sentences in footnote 2, billions of dollars? You had some comment you wanted to make about this?
In footnote 2, nothing with the language, but in footnote 2, I had trouble finding that. That's not a very clear citation. And what's that number 9 hanging out there for? So
it's the page number in Blue Book form.
Okay, that wasn't clear to me. But is there a way to?
Well, where are the white males?
Warren, can you mute yourself, Warren? Or Matt, or do you have? Yeah, thank you. Let's do that committee on style. We'll figure out, we'll make sure that's the right citation and possibly get a link or something if that is consistent with ACA's style. Okay.
Okay. And then
thanks for flagging it.
In footnote 6, it says explained in section, it says explained in section 2018. It's really explained in part 6. Section
Sorry,
2.
Matt, stay with the footnote. I think he's at 16.
Footnote
6.
That it says explained in its part 6, section 208 or 280
of the OMB circular. Okay.
Yes, there you go.
Thanks for that. Okay, let's go back above the line. We need the paragraph that begins on the previous part of the screen. So various authorities govern. So we have this paragraph. So Matt suggested that we delete in the present administration because the footnote clarifies what that refers to. So Steph, did you have a response to that?
I would support that suggestion. And we had shared with the consultants some supplementary materials after they prepared their report to show that actually this has been in 11 prior administrations as well. And so it is really truly a long-standing initiative on the part of OMB, perhaps not this exact framing, but the inclusion of customer experience in A11. So fine with deleting in the present administration.
Great. Okay, so on 32 and 33, at the end of this paragraph, the question is whether we want to identify above the line what we mean by customer life experiences and human-centered design rather than leaving it to the footnote. The footnotes then are quite long. So the question is what we would bring up to the text. So customer life experiences in 6, and then human-centered design in 7. One thing we could do is do like a quick parenthetical of the short meaning of each of those terms of art with the longer footnotes below. So that might be one way of handling that. So let me just pause for a sec to let Matt get the parentheticals on the screen. Okay, so that's sort of responding to this idea that we have the definitions above the line. It then becomes a super long sentence. So we could break it up. But so Dave, let me call on you.
I just put a vote in for, I thought it was fine in the footnote, but I may be in the minority here, but I'd just keep it the way that it was.
Okay, other folks, do we want to have it above the line or below the line? Bill Funk.
I thought footnote was fine as well.
Okay. Anybody want to speak in favor of Matt's proposal to get the definition above the line, or you want to, or if not, then I think we'll just keep it below the line. Okay, so let's delete the thing I just proposed adding in support of Matt's suggestion, and we'll keep it in the footnotes. Did anybody have any substantive comments? So then we should delete Matt's comments, delete these comments before we move on. Okay, let's, what, Matt, I've lost what you're doing. Are you just accepting? No, I don't think you can accept footnote 4 because we still have committee on style work to do there. So let's go back down and show the committee.
I was just moving back up to the beginning of the paragraph we were working on.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
The
sorry. Yep. Sorry, I thought you were taking us to footnote 4. Okay, so are people otherwise fine with the paragraph that begins at 28? Do you want to now turn the page, maybe, Matt? Okay, any other comments on that paragraph? Okay, let's go to the next paragraph then, the one that begins in line 34. So here we have the proposal to add the ombuds offices. I think this comes from Nina. We have already added a bunch of references to ombuds in the recommendation, so this is also sort of making this parallel. So can we go ahead and accept those changes, or does anybody have any other comment they want to make on this paragraph? Okay, I see some nods from those whose faces I can see. Bill?
I'm sorry because I like ombuds, but this is, it seems, it's just employ numerous strategies, and all the others are things that every agency should do. Should every agency establish an ombuds office? And I'm not sure about that.
What makes you think that the language of the description here says that every agency should do this? This is just a description of general strategies that
I receive.
You recede. Okay, so I think it's a more general overview of things that different agencies do. Again, helpful to distinguish between the shoulds and the description here, just as we had above. So, okay, so I think I hear no objections to accepting this as a descriptive statement of what some agencies do. And so then if we accept this, then we will also accept the deletion of the and, so that we can move it. So Matt, can you go back up? Just accepting the and in 37. Okay, and then we also have our collaboration sentences, the customer experience teams. This is again the statement of fact of what agencies have done. We talked about documenting this when we expressed some concern on the committee with the use of the word customer, but we talked about explaining this in the preamble, what we were talking about. Here's our data sharing sentence. Any other comments on anything else in this paragraph before we move on? Steph.
Just noting that this might be the place to drop the footnote to define the fair information practice principles in this last sentence. So data sharing between agencies. So I sent Matt the link. I'm not suggesting he edit in real time, but I think we should probably say something about those principles, and then we can define them through that link there.
And Steph, is your proposal to add it to the sentence above the line, or just to add a citation to in the footnote?
Well, it's a little weird to define the term in the footnote, and unless we say something about it either there or above. So
yeah.
So maybe it's data sharing between agencies, comma, consistent with the fair information practice principles, and especially when used in conjunction. I don't know that the grammar there is perfect, but something like that I think would be good.
Yeah, the committee on style could work on the grammar, but are people satisfied with, since we've called it out in the recommendation, that this is a good place to mention it above the line? Bill?
I think you don't want and especially. It's consistent with fair information practice principles, comma. So it's data sharing between agencies, especially when used in conjunction with blah, blah, blah.
Okay, not to get too, I used to be a 7th grade grammar teacher, but do we want the comma after agencies? Because don't we really mean data sharing between agencies consistent with the fair, or do we really want the comma there? My grammar head tells me to take off the comma after, so I would propose that, but I could be talked down from that. Bill, you're about to say something.
Well, it's the data sharing that has to be consistent with fair information practices, and the especially when used does not refer to the consistency with the fair information practice. It refers to the data sharing, and therefore.
Yeah, so you're more comfortable with the parenthetical.
Yeah.
I mean, so data sharing between agencies, that is consistent or something like that. I think this is a committee on style. Let's if people are I hear what you're saying, Bill. So Matt, can you just put a pin for committee on style to deal with the grammar around what is being, where the antecedents are. Okay, are we okay otherwise with this paragraph? Okay, let's move to the next page then. Let's look at the paragraph that begins at line 46. Any comments on this? We didn't get any pre-submitted comments. Everybody okay with this? Welcome, Bernard. Good to see you. Would you like to comment on this paragraph?
Yes, I apologize for being late, but I had another commitment. So I would just say such as legal aid organizations and others to be consistent with the change we made in the body of the text that recognize that there are other organizations that provide at no cost or low cost aid to individuals.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, any comment on that? Can we go ahead and accept that based on the recommendations we already made? Great, and any other thoughts on this paragraph before we move on? Wonderful. All right, let's turn to I think it's the last paragraph, if I'm not mistaken, of the preamble, Matt. No, it's not. Okay, second to last paragraph. So take a minute to look again at this last paragraph that begins at line 51, and then get your hand up if you want to comment on anything, please. Okay, line 60 and 63 are sort of shifting the focus a little, not shifting the focus, pointing a focus. I just want to make sure people look at those and are okay with them. This captures, I think, the substance of our discussions in the sort of the 4 principles that we started with, but just calling people's attention to them. Okay, any comments on this? Totally minor comment for committee on style, but whatever we said about consultation techniques, I think we changed it to a different adjective form, consultative or something like that in line 53. So we should just make that parallel, but that's committee on style stuff. Anything substantive on this paragraph before we move to the last one? Okay, let's move to the last paragraph then of the preamble. And these I think these are Steph's edits. Okay, great. So let's just take a look Steph, I'll call on you in one minute. Just let's take a look at the changes, proposed changes. Okay, so Steph, your hand went up and down. Did it go down because I said just a minute, or do you want to speak or do you not want to speak?
Only at the tempo, mostly they speak
okay.
for themselves. We were just trying to conform to the recommendation.
Okay, great. Bill.
It says several recommendations. I thought we made a recommendation.
True.
Directed to OMB. And then there's no mention of anything to Congress. Now, did we eliminate any reference to Congress? No, we did. We included they should expressly provide something. So there is a recommendation directed to Congress. So I imagine the preamble should mention.
Agreed. So we should add a sentence there.
And I'd even leave it to the Committee on Style to do it. It's a short recommendation.
I feel comfortable that the Committee on Style could handle that. Thank you for flagging it. Great. Okay, so can we accept the proposed changes from OMB and Steph? I hear no objections to doing so. So let's go ahead and do that. Great, and the Committee on Style will go ahead and take care of that. Okay, so as far as I understand our task, we have 3 more things to do. One, we have to go back to the language that we said we were going to go back to when Bernie got on the call. So I think we can do that now. 2, we need to talk about the title, and 3, we'll need to vote. Before we do any of that, I will call on Bridget.
Such a good sport, and apologies, I had to excuse myself to meet with a very knowledgeable HVAC tech to the season for making HVAC working. So, okay, sorry for missing what I'm sure was a wonderful discussion of the preamble. And I've been wondering if we should perhaps memorialize some of what we went over there, removing the recommendation about creating an exemption from the PRA for customer experience research. And my reason for thinking that perhaps it is worth mentioning the preamble is thus that this has been a topic for several years. I'll say probably more than the better part of a decade. And so it comes up a fair bit. This question of like whether to cover customer experience research at all. And I think we can expect that it'll come up at the plenary. And so I'm just wondering if it might be worth heading some of that off to sort of signal that, yes, we did think about it, and yes, we moved away from it. So I wrote something which I'll paste as potential language to include in the preamble. And
great. This is an excellent use of substance in the chat.
But in some
Bridget is recognized, and we are focused on her language in the chat. Thank you. Okay. So, and Bridget, before we do that, where would it, okay. I assume it would not go would it go at the end here? Because it's connected directly to what we sort of thought about for Congress?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could go right before this final line that we've got in red line about it also includes the recommendation to Congress.
Okay, great. Okay, great. And so the idea is that in other recommendations, Congress, in other like ACA's overall projects, this particular idea about exempting customer experience research from the PRA has come up, or you just mean that PRA modification has come up?
Yeah, PRA modification comes up. It might happen, sort of bilaterally in agency conversations with Congress or conversations with NOMB. And so I'm not aware that it's come up in ACA spaces before. I'm just thinking that you wouldn't think that such a topic would be such a hot button, but it is. And so I think we could expect someone to raise it at the plenary, and this might be a way to just sort of signal to folks reading it that we did think about it and we decided not to go that way.
Okay, so what do people think about this? Don.
I would just echo something Jim raised earlier, which is that we actually don't have an evidentiary basis for the size of the problem here. And so, we could certainly include that language, but we don't actually know if this is a real problem or if this is a big problem or if it's not. And so, if we sort of say we've considered this, that might overemphasize the degree of certainty we have about the outcome. But obviously, I'm not on the committee here, but if it were me and this was like a problem that came up, I would say I would love to have more data on this as a problem rather than assume that we know what the correct answer is.
Great. So the idea is both we don't have enough information as a matter of fact and as a matter of law. Probably we thought based on what we did know, the existing, okay. Wow. Bridget, this is just giving rise to what you say about the controversy about, okay. Steph, then John, then Bill.
I just wanted to know, and I regret that we didn't get this information to Don and Amy in time to make it into their draft report, but we did provide a memo supplementing, their research with information about existing flexibilities. And so we do have some empirical research on the use of the PRA to adopt customer experience research, and there's quite a lot of it. Truly 670 different collections, nothing to blink at. So while I agree that there isn't as much empirical support documenting the problem, I think that there is some empirical support for documenting that flexibilities are available.
So would your proposal then be to delete that new sentence at line 77 to 78 or just to soften it? Steph.
I would delete both of those lines personally. That would be my recommendation, but I'm not actually on the committee, so I'd be curious to hear what.
Okay, great. So sort of Don not on the committee suggests having it, Steph not on the committee suggests not having it. So committee members, please share some views as to the back and forth. John.
This language is directed to the full conference, but ultimately this recommendation is to the agencies. And why would the agencies care that you thought about something and then deleted it? And I think that this belongs in the manager's statement up front to the conference, not in the actual recommendation.
So that also, that makes sense to me. I have to give remarks at the beginning explaining what we did in the committee process. So Don and Amy and Pam will comment on what they found, and then I have to talk about our deliberation. So I actually could very well say, and then I could give sort of more complexity to what Steph is saying. So that's another proposal. Bill Funk.
Well, I think John's point is a good one. I mean, the conference didn't consider it. I mean, so it was the committee that considered it. So that probably shouldn't be in the conference's recommendation. So I agree, you should probably address it.
Great. So maybe could you get all of the sentences back then, Matt, but as a note for not addition here, but for my explanation when I present the recommendation at the plenary. Bill, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, that was the end of my comment.
Okay, great. Bernard, I'm actually not sure if you go by Bernie, to which I saw you refer to in an email, or if you go by Bernard. Which one do you prefer? You're on mute either way.
Yeah, Bernie is good, and I was about to lower my hand. I don't need to.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you, Bernie. Okay, so that's where we are. And I think, Bridget, what you're saying sort of captures, it doesn't head it off in advance, but it will, in advance, like pre-submitted, but I will be able to speak to it. So any other thoughts on this issue before we go back to the issue on the trigger for the teams? Okay, let's go back to the trigger for the teams. We are going to define these three things that Matt has left for us, but I think that the committee can trust the Committee on Style to do this, defining life experiences and defining these costs and defining, there was one other definition that I think we could access. Oh no, this one might be a tiny bit substantive, access their own personal information. I think we can define low bono, but this one maybe is a tiny bit substantive. Access their own personal information. So I'm at line 128, 129 in recommendation 12. This is information to the public. Somebody had added access their own personal information in a previous recommendation, in a previous meeting. I don't recall who. Nina, this might have been something you added. Somebody who had a special interest in personal identifying information added this. Does anybody want to speak to this? Bernie?
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure what the issue is, but under the Privacy Act, people have a right to access their own information, which can be extremely helpful in proceedings like immigration proceedings. So I'm not sure whether this is just restating what the Privacy Act requires, or is supplementing that in some way. But I think it's at least helpful to know that there is a statute that already, I think, has this sort of requirement of access to one's own information.
Okay, so that could be something that we're referencing back to. Nina?
Yeah, I can't remember whether I proposed this or not, but I mean, as I can think about it, if you're applying for benefits or something, it's very helpful to know what the agency has about you. And I think it ties to your online accounts or online application and pre-population. And so, I sort of see that as tying into other parts of the recommendations, like number 11 above.
Okay, great. So it doesn't sound like anybody's concerned with this reference. Are you comfortable with letting the Committee on Style find a good definition per Privacy Act? Matt's, maybe you should flag that. Bernie, is your hand up anew, and then I'll go to Bill?
Yeah, it's new. I would just add maybe expeditiously before access, because one of the problems with the Privacy Act may be that there are delays. So to the extent that can be speeded up, particularly when the information is needed to obtain benefits, that would be a good principle, I think, to adopt.
Okay, if anybody's concerned with expeditiously, get a hand up. If not, we'll accept it. Bill?
I would like to know if the reporters have anything to say about this particular part of the recommendation. Is there something in the report to which this is responsive?
Thanks for that. Pam?
Yeah, I mean, I think based on some of the comments already made, yeah. I mean, so another way to think about this actually is that it's not uncommon that people are denied benefits and they're denied benefits based on some kind of information that the agency has that the individual doesn't have. Do you know what I mean? So mistakes happen, like your earnings can be reported incorrectly or some other kind of, so this is actually like it very much falls in line kind of with, I think with what the report overall has spoken about. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Pam. Bill, do you have a proposal to modify this language in light of what Pam has said, or are you comfortable with?
No, I just,
okay.
I was really just addressing Matt's question, all right? And
great.
And
you went on mute, Bill.
If they can explain it, I can accept it.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think I hear approval of delegation to the Committee on Style to get the right definition here. I feel confident that the Committee on Style can also define low bono. Unless anybody would like to wordsmith one right now, but not seeing any hands, I think let's go to the trigger for the customer service team. And I think we dealt with this comment from Matt as well. Okay, so recommendation 17. So there's Bernie's, just like the background was the background research we had given to the agency, we had given to the Committee on Style / ACUS, go back and find what these sources say. They didn't really say all that much helpful. And then we remembered that you had a pre-submitted comment that talked about a proposed trigger, but we didn't want to work through it without you. So let's turn to your proposal here, and then we'll kind of hash this. This is the last remaining recommendation out before we go back to the title, before we take a vote.
Okay. So I guess the comment is in the margins, maybe, because I don't remember my precise formulation, but it was something like the trigger is an expectation that there'll be individual communications with the agency, which would be responded to on an individualized basis, something like that. So essentially, it seems to me that these customer experience teams will be needed in situations where you're talking about communications between individual members of the public and the agency, particularly where there's some expectation that there'll be a response from the agency. And I guess associated with that was some view that we're looking at agencies as if they're all or nothing, as far as either we're categorizing the agency as being one for which customer experience teams are worthwhile, and ones which they're not, and ones which are interacting with the public in a certain way and ones which are not. And it seems to me that it makes sense to talk about programs or functions of agencies. And I suspect that many agencies will have some sort of function where they are expecting individual communication from either people seeking benefits, people seeking protection, people complaining about violation of the agency's rules and regulations, and for which there will be some response to the individual. And so it seemed to me the trigger should be where there is a function or program within the agency, where there's this expectation of this kind of individualized communication back and forth. So that's
great.
That's my proposal.
Thanks for that. Okay, so committee members, we have some choices as to this. One, we can retain
Did Eloise freeze for everybody? Eloise, you're lost.
Few of us have let her know in the chat, so hopefully she'll return shortly.
Well, while we're without a leader, I thought that one response to this would be to begin this with sort of Bernie's idea that agencies should identify which programs or activities it has that actually, I mean, his language, whether they have particular programs or functions that involve communications from individual members of the public to which they will respond on an individualized basis. And then agency should assemble a team devote and then have a team, assemble a team devoted to improving the experiences that individuals have. These individuals should have when interacting with the agency, often referred to as customer experience teams. That's at least responsive to one of Bernie's points that I thought was very well taken. Does that respond to your other point as well, Bernie?
Yes, I think it does. I think it both captures the focus on programs and functions, and also that we're looking at individualized communication. So yes, I think it does. I mean, we might add particular programs or functions. I think that might be more comprehensive.
So I have jumped back in on my phone this time since my computer internet seems to have conked out at Georgetown. Thank you for keeping this going in my absence. This is.
Whoops.
You still there? You still there?
Sorry, the problem with the phone is that when I check to see if I'm actually on, it muted me. So, okay. So I was going to suggest that we get some language like this up on the screen. Bill, can I take it back? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So what I was kind of going to give an overview is we could either keep the language as it is. We could use some of Matt's softer but less specific, as appropriate or should consider language, or we could do just what Bernie has suggested that Bill Funk has gotten up on the screen here. So I think those are the choices before the committee. So I joined when Bill was still getting this drafted, and I heard Bernie's response, but I'll now ask if other folks want to raise their hands as well, though I confess I'm not totally sure what I can see from my phone here. So
John Kaminsky had his hand up for quite a while.
Okay.
My comment is that CX is a term of art that's defined in different administration places, like on the website for President's Management Agenda. But the language that we did while Eloise is gone is good language to me.
Okay, thanks for that, John. Bridget told me that possibly turning off my video would make it less choppy, so I've done that now. Do keep letting me know. Nina.
So I like the language. I'm just concerned, we've been saying we want people to do things online, and I'm wondering about this, to which they will respond on an individual basis. That I think Bernie had said individualized. And I mean, to me, that maybe says it doesn't have to be one-on-one, but it is individual for that. It's directed to that individual, but it's not one person to one person necessarily. And that incorporates some of the previous ACUS recommendations about automated legal advice and stuff like that. You should really use your team to explore, to continually monitor what's going on in those arenas, how you're delivering this advice, regardless of the modality.
Okay, thanks for that. So I think I hear you saying that this language with that modification from individual to individualized works for you. Okay, yes. Great. I don't see any other hands up now. Are people then satisfied with the new language that we have here? I'm looking for hands.
No hands at the moment.
No hands. Yeah, no, I've figured out how to toggle on my phone. Even though I don't know if you can keep seeing my thumb move over the camera here. So, oh no, because my camera's off. You can't even see that. Okay. So I think then if nobody objects, let's keep this as the sense of the committee as to the narrower version that we're talking about. So it's not just leaving it to agency discretion, but it's also not just talking to all agencies on an undifferentiated basis. So it sounds like the sense of the committee is that we can move forward with accepting these proposed changes. I am pausing just for a beat to see if anybody gets a hand up to propose otherwise. But seeing none, I think we can go ahead and accept that. Okay, so then, Matt, I don't think we have any other comments out that we were waiting for. I think everything else is committee on style stuff. And I think the very last thing to do is to go back and revisit what we wanted to call the recommendation, and then we'll take a vote. So the title of the recommendation, or the title of the project as approved by the council, was identifying and reducing burdens in administrative processes. And on the first day, we had a discussion with these notes captured in the sidebar that we weren't totally sure that this captured what we wanted to do, but we also thought we would go back and work our way through the actual recommendation before revisiting the title. So we had these notes about identifying and reducing burdens on, and then we thought maybe administrative customers, or do we want to talk about customers, beneficiaries, the public? We had this alternative, identifying and reducing administrative burdens on the public, and just some other sort of notes for areas we wanted to go. So let's reopen this and see where people are on the title, which could include just keeping it as it is, or it could also include a proposal that the council change the title. So I'm looking for hands. Nina.
I like adding on the public or something like that, because I mean, although by reducing administrative burdens on the public, you may reduce burdens on the agency, the focus of this recommendation really is the public, the customer.
So identifying and reducing administrative burdens on the public, or Matt just put something else in, identifying and reducing burdens on the public in administrative processes. Nina, does that capture what you liked?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, Bill.
I'm happy with what Nina suggested. I was going to just object to the way you phrase it, which is reducing burdens on the public, because that makes it sound like it's regulatory burdens, not
right.
So that's why reducing burdens on the public in administrative processes is fine with me.
Right. Great. And is it like more specific than, because it really captures what we're talking about, the processes, not the regulatory burdens. Okay, Conway and then Don.
One alternative is maybe adding people experience, identifying and reducing burdens people experience in administrative processes.
Identifying and reducing burdens people experience in administrative processes. Okay, and what are you going for there that's different from burdens on the public in administrative processes?
If the concern was the term public, it still keeps it person-based. I thought I heard that was a concern for like the PRA, but if that's not, I'm fine with as the previous suggestion.
Okay. Don, I think your hand was up.
Yeah, I wanted to endorse David Lewis's suggestion in the chat, which is identifying and reducing administrative burdens on the public. And I'll suggest a couple of reasons why. Partly, I think administrative burdens is a term of art that is used in places like the executive order and in guidance coming from OMB and OIRA. And certainly there's also attention to regulatory burdens, but I think most people reading this will not be confused on that. I think there is a potential to make burdens in administrative processes too narrow, because it could be read to exclude types of burdens that arise from, say, learning costs or compliance costs. So if you just focus on processes and not other aspects of people's experiences, you could read that as focusing very much on compliance cost part of burdens. So I think that administrative processes, to me, maybe narrows the focus too much. Although I do like Nina's suggestion about on the public, for partly because it's also possible that you would have administrative burdens on public employees themselves, but that has clearly, not been something that this the report or the committee is focused on. So I think having that clarification is actually really helpful.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll call on Bernie.
So I like all the formulations with burdens on the public, whether it's in the middle, whether it's at the end. Just kind of Conway raised an interesting point, and I thought that suggestion seemed to me to not flow that smoothly. So we do have a suggestion just to say members of the public, and I'm wondering if using members of the public rather than the public, whether it's in the middle or at the end of the title, would allay some of Conway's concerns and not really substantively cause any other substantive problems. So
Great.
that was
Great. So members of the public being, thanks for noting that, Matt. Back to Bill Funk.
I'm just going to have to say again, I very strongly oppose Donald's suggestion. I mean, as somebody who deals with this stuff all the time, administrative burdens on the public is almost always identified as the regulatory burdens on people. It's what the government tells them they have to do or can't do, or so forth. It's the substantive restrictions. It's not the procedural restrictions. And that's really what we're talking about in this recommendation. Now, I agree that once somebody starts reading the preamble, they'll know that we're not talking about regulatory burdens. But people, looking at the title will think it's about something else, I think. And I think that would be very deceptive and make it, people say you're not really dealing with the administrative burdens, just all this process stuff. So I really think you have to get the processes concept in there in the title. Members of the public, I don't care about that, but it's the burdens of the administrative processes, not the substantive burdens. And I think that Don's recommendation makes it sound like it's the regulatory burdens.
Okay, thanks for that. Bridget, and then Steph.
So I can't, this is like ACA said it's best or worst, I don't know. But the title issue, I mean, I'm comfortable with identifying and reducing administrative burdens on the public, because I think that jives with the way this issue is talked about. Generally, I agree with Don that I don't think people confuse that with questions about, burdens on regulated entities, for example. I think we're clear on that. So I'm not as concerned as Bill is about confusion on this one, and ultimately it's just a title. I think I'd favor a title that's like at least somewhat pithy and to the point, and not over lawyered, although I like lawyering. But so that's what I is on identifying and reducing administrative burdens on the public.
Thanks. And Steph.
I would make the same point. I think that the consultants have really changed the public dialogue about these issues in the last several years. Like if you had asked 5 years ago what we mean when we say administrative burden, it would probably not be something most agency officials could answer, but I think many of them now could. And really that's thanks to Don and Amy and Sam. And so I would support, using this new language and exalting it in the title as such.
Don, you put in the chat the link to the is this an executive, or I'm not going to mess with links on my phone here and the fear that I'll mess Zoom up. But is this an executive order? Remind us exactly what is in the chat.
So this is, if you get, if you Google OMB administrative burdens, that's the first thing that you find.
And is this, we do not cite it in footnote 1. We cite your report in footnote 1. Do we cite this link anywhere in the preamble?
I don't think that we do.
Okay, Matt, do you?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so I have to say, breaking rules somewhat here, my instinct was the same as Bill Fung's, that I think people will, we spent a long time on the first meeting with people saying, oh, I was confused about what this report was. So I do share some worry that even if we reach consensus as a committee, the council is going to be concerned about the regulatory confusion, but I could be wrong there. I think what I hear is that the sense of the committee overall is that keeping it without just using the phrase that's becoming a term of art, possibly let's add this link to the citation, possibly even in footnote 1, which uses administrative burdens, might be the way to go. So I think that I'm looking for more hands here. I don't see more hands. I'm kind of hearing that the sense of the committee is, I'm looking now to see which is the second from the bottom of what Matt just had. Matt, can you scroll up to show us what you are? Yeah, identifying and reducing administrative burdens on the public. I am hearing the sense of the committee is that that's the proposed title. I am looking for hands.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what the title was again?
Sure. What I am hearing the sense of the committee is, not unified, but the sense of the committee is that the title should be as follows: identifying and reducing administrative burdens on the public. I think that kind of captures what people, the thrust of the overall set of suggestions. So Matt, do you want to put that in the proposed title up above, burdens? Okay, and I am going to call on Bill again.
Well, I've heard the Don speak to it. I've heard Bridget speak to it. I don't know if maybe your sense of the committee is good. I did, but
yeah,
at least two of the yeah. committee members, you and I are both committee members, and we view it differently. So I don't mind losing on a vote, but it might be just worthwhile just to take a vote.
I don't really object to that. We don't actually. Okay, so I think and this sort of is the last thing we need to do before vote overall. So we're about to move to voting. So maybe this is actually a good time to move to voting. So then, Matt, can I ask you to get 2 different versions up? One would be, I'll call it the Funk proposal.
Excuse me, can I just make
sure, go ahead. Yes, of course, Nina.
Since this is just a recommendation to the council, why don't we just submit to them both possible titles and let them decide, so that they see we had a debate about it and they can come down with what they think is the right approach.
Sounds good to me.
I don't object to that, though I would love to hear from, say, Jeremy, your take on whether the council would look kindly on that or would rather that we make an actual proposal.
I mean, I think one option is just to tee it up for assembly debate if you think it's worth having that debate by the entire conference. Otherwise, I think I would suggest going forward with a recommendation. I don't know what role the council would play in this process, frankly.
Okay, my understanding was that the council had to weigh in on this because title
Yeah.
changes are different from other proposed
Correct.
recommendations.
Correct.
So I think I was sort of being guided by what I thought ACA's practice was.
That is correct. Although usually it's, do we like this or not? Should we put it mostly comes down, and maybe Sean can speak to why we've always done it this way. But I think it has to do with the council's role as setting the agenda for the plenary section and sort of greenlighting the project initially. It's probably helpful for the committee to come up with a recommendation. I've never seen a process where the council is actually asked to make a substantive decision on something the committee hasn't decided on. Andy, as a council member on this call, I see you have your hand up. So maybe I'll turn to Andy.
Thank you. And Andy, sorry for not seeing that you had come. So hello, Andy.
Yeah,
please give us your sense.
That's okay, Eloise. Hello to you and to everyone. I would much rather you come down on a recommendation and see if the council is comfortable with it or not. I'd like to avoid an assembly debate, on this, because of everyone understands that. Please pick one.
Okay, so thanks for that, Andy. I note that it's 3:45 and we have 2 people who want to speak and we have to vote on the overall recommendation. So my proposal is that I call on Nina, I call on Amy. I do think we should take a vote on the 2 different titles. And then we can see where we are, and then we'll go back and vote on the overall recommendation. So Nina.
I forgot to lower my hand. So
okay, great, great, no problem. Amy Bunk.
So my suggestion would be to number the 2 possible titles, 1 and 2, and then we could just vote in the chat.
Okay, so everybody who prefers 1, I think put 1 in the chat. Can I have somebody else count though? From my phone, I'm not confident in my ability to do this. Who can ACAS people, who shall I call on here to handle this counting?
Matt and I will count.
Okay, thank you for that, Jeremy. So if
this is only committee members who vote.
Yes, and thank you for that clarification. So this is only committee members. So if you have a question about whether you are, let me actually pause there. If you have a question about whether you're entitled to vote, Matt is the person to ask. So please ask Matt if you have a question about whether you're entitled to vote. So I think if you would like to have, if you prefer 1 as your title, put 1, just put 1 in the chat. If you prefer 2 as your title, just put 2 in the chat. If you are entitled to vote. And then I think that should, there should be no confusion about what you're voting for. And Matt, do I get a vote as chair? I think I do, right?
You do, yes.
Okay, thank you.
The question, Eloise, is whether you can on your phone or not.
Well, that's what I'm just trying to do, but I'm pretty sure I have the technological capacity.
I've got the current count, so if you just, oh, there we go.
Okay,
the twos
right, so I'm voting.
3.
Okay, all right, so, and there goes my ability to read so much for my ability to read the sense of the committee. Okay, well, so thank you for all of that substantive discussion. And so that's then what we'll propose to the council but they are free always to revert to what they had before or to make any other changes. So for people who wanted the administrative burden language without administrative processes, we may yet see it. I do think and I think Matt, you added the URL that Don put in the chat, right? So we'll have that as the term of art right up at the very beginning. Okay, so then the very last thing to do is vote for the overall recommendation. So if you have a vote, I guess I should, does anybody who hasn't been, I mean, I've been recognizing everybody as a matter of course, even whether you can't vote. So I don't know that I need to do anything particularly formal about that, but I'm just going to pause for a minute. Bridget, I see a hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Matt, maybe a question for you. I thought before we talked about the idea of having a footnote in here that would talk about some of the normative concerns about referring to members of the public as customers in this context. Is that, and I'm worried that I'm looking at an old version. Does that make it?
That was, I believe you're talking about the discussion we had with Bernie's suggestions at recommendation 2017. I don't know whether we also wanted to include something here, or did we add that? Eloise, do you remember if we added that in response to Committee on Style requests last time?
Look at footnote 6. Look at footnote 6.
Exactly. It's in the preamble.
Right, but then
no, this is yeah.
And then number 9.
Yeah.
Footnote 9 is where we put the definition of customer.
And so I think what we had decided, Bridget, was that by making it clear that it's a legal term of art, we weren't necessarily going to be discussing the broader debate that we had. But I think, do I hear you saying that you would like a sentence to that regard somewhere?
That just acknowledges that, and I guess I can try to work with Matt to add it if you'd like. It's just something that kind of explains that there are normative concerns with referring to members of the public as customers. And ideally we'd have a citation or two, but I don't want to beleaguer it. I just want to make sure, because that was kind of an important aspect for me. And I think, I don't know if Pam's still on, but at least a couple other committees, folks worried that ACUS would be basically adopting the customer language without acknowledging that we were, as I recall, we acquiesced to the use of terms like customer in this context because that's how the rest of the government is tending to refer to this, but that we're sort of holding apart the existence of those normative concerns.
So I think the proposal then would be to add a sentence either before or after the definition in footnote 9 that says, that captures the committee. No, we're not talking about the committee. While there are some concerns, while people have raised concerns about CEG blah, is this the kind of thing you are talking about, Bridget?
I mean, I think where we landed in last week's or the second meeting was that ACUS was not taking a position on the use of customer. We were just using it because that's what others use. And so I think the while people have raised concerns sort of leads to like, well, people have raised concerns, we're using this anyway because we like it. And I would not favor ACUS making statements about that. But so sorry, I don't want to bog us down on this. I know we're so close. If there's objection to what I'm saying, then we can keep. I'm happy talking about it. But if you're comfortable with me adding a sentence about some of the normative concerns here, then I can work on that separately with Matt. I'm sorry I didn't come with it.
And that's okay. We still have 8 minutes. We do have to get through a vote, but let me just take a minute to just see. So the idea would be that we would have this placeholder sentence that does not endorse, but is not necessarily critical, right, Bridget? That's just acknowledging that it's a complex term and we're using it because that's the term of art.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill.
I was just going to say to start the sentence by saying we use the term customer in light of its use in executive order, blah, blah, blah.
Notwithstanding normative concerns about something.
Notwithstanding concerns with the concept of
reducing the members of the public to
customers, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and then the question is whether to have it above the line or below the line, and whether ACUS can have we. I don't think ACUS says we, but it's whatever ACUS says. That would be a committee on style thing. Yeah.
Yeah, then you
the
just make a passive use, the term customers used.
Yeah. Okay. And Bernie, who I recognize, has language in the chat, notwithstanding the debate regarding the appropriateness of referring to members of the public as customers. Okay, and then we would need a citation. Are people comfortable with that? I'm looking for a hand to object, and if not, I'm going to assume people are comfortable with that, and that's a delegation to the Committee on Style. Okay, I don't see any hands. Okay, so thanks for that, Bridget. Thanks to all who have contributed to this last debate. And so now I would like to invite everybody who has a vote to vote. So if you would like to vote in favor of the recommendation as it stands with the few delegations to the Committee on Style, I'll ask you to put yes in the chat. If you'd like to vote against it, I'll ask you to put no in the chat. And if you don't have a vote, don't vote.
Looks like we have unanimous assent.
Wonderful. I'm so pleased with everybody's wonderful participation, robust input. This has really just been a joy to work with everybody on this. So with that, I think the last task I have, although I will be happy to stand corrected if anybody from ACUS wants to correct me, I think I just have to welcome everybody's attendance for the conference plenary, which is on December 14th, which is an all-day affair. This is the final meeting where all of the ACUS conference will vote on not only this proposed recommendation, but all the other ones that the other committees have worked on. If you have any questions about that or would like to attend and don't otherwise have information about how to do so, please get in touch with Matt. And all of this is available on the ACUS website. So with that, I think we are done. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Eloise, and thank you everyone on the committee. Eloise, we'll see you next week at the council meeting.
I'll look forward to that. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.